Hello, I'm Elijah Beam, staff writer for The Game Effect, and this is our official video review of The Last of Us. Now, I will actually be reading my own review due to technical issues on my end. I'm recording this bit after the rest of the video review is done. However, this issue should not occur again, so next time I will be reading it. Thank you.
To say I was wary of reviewing The Last of Us would be an understatement. Back in the day, I was one of Uncharted's biggest outspoken critics. When I saw that The Last of Us was another Naughty Dog game, I was worried. I didn't want to endure another adventure with Nathan Drake at the helm, but under a new name. The good news is, Naughty Dog seems to have finally strived to be more than just a pretty face.
Get a live one.
No. I'm not infected. It's
Hold
wrong.
her
This
down.
man's wrong.
Do it.
Please.
Eyes forward.
You play as Joel, a survivor of a 20-year-long epidemic, trying to stay alive while grieving over his lost family. He's a smuggler inside a Pennsylvania quarantine zone, alongside his far more interesting partner Tess. When an old friend double-crosses them, they set out to reclaim their smuggled goods. Before they know it, they have to smuggle a young girl named Ellie out of the quarantine zone or never get their gear back. Just an hour or two later, and things turn into True Grit with zombies. Plus, you kill a lot of people. A lot of people. You wipe out at least an entire town's worth of people, and get a few friends killed in the process. Which is to say, The Last of Us is a very dark game. It wants to treat its situation seriously and make you regret stabbing enemies in the throat. It tries to make the gameplay match the same tone, and it sometimes works. The emphasis on stealth and realism in its style of play works very well in the beginning, but it sometimes stretches suspension of disbelief as the story and gameplay try to go in two different directions. For example, when you get to play as Ellie in a brief section of the game, she is suddenly as weak as Joel. It doesn't matter that you saw her shove off clickers before. She's under your control now, and therefore must die more easily. There's also a point near the end where the story wants to play out like an action game when the combat is at its most grueling and brutal. Your homemade gear isn't comparable to military-grade armor and assault rifles. It's ironic how hard the game hammers home your actions and tries to make you question your own motives, while it intentionally does things that make no sense. Annoying fetch quests are disguised as puzzles. There are scenarios that you don't know are unwinnable until you find a way around them through trial and error. And there is a stupid forced twist that at least leads to one of the best boss fights I've ever played. But damn, does it beat you into the corner that it wanted you in with the subtlety of a brick to the face. The Last of Us knows what it wants and will scream its head off until you give in to it. The game starts with a nice set of fresh faces and ideas. There's a clear sense of love and care for the world, and an effort to make people be memorable individuals. They all have some aspect that takes them beyond the archetype. Bill is a survivor as much as he is defying a common stereotype. Ellie has already grown up a fair amount by the time Joel arrives, making her perspective far more textured. Tess starts off as a cold cynic, but shows a sympathy for those around her and a morality that may run deeper than Joel's. Joel, however, suffers from a generic backstory and a total lack of interesting development as a character. When there's a cutscene, he almost fades into the background unless he's talking. Having the main protagonist be a grumpy old man with nothing to add cuts against the game's story. Even so, Joel still retains more charm than a few characters that fall completely flat with lackluster performances, namely the brothers Henry and Sam. Joel's brother Tommy gets way too little screen time to really grow, as does Firefly's leader Marlene. Save for Henry, Joel, and Sam, the cast is fairly memorable, but you will wish they had had a bigger presence. A large portion of the cast are only present for a single chapter, making an otherwise interesting group of people feel irrelevant by the end. Even the game's ending seems to not care enough about those who came before and their sacrifices. Individual moments and chapters may stay with you, but they're muddled by weaker sections, as well as stronger ones that feel like part of a better game. One such case is Ellie's portion of the game. It's one of the best experiences the game has to offer, but it only lasts for part of a single chapter. More problems come from the infected. Caused by a fungal spore that invades the brain, the infection converts humans into the fungus's worker drones. The imaginative concept could be used to support any type of enemy Naughty Dog wants to make, but instead, it's used for just 3 tired enemy types that we've all seen before. The running zombie, the zombie that can instantly kill you, and the enemy that spews acid. These are the only 3 types of infected in the entire game, and they are always closed off, isolated, or packed in small rooms. The infection makes its victims go blind, but they use echolocation. This means moving slowly and silently is important. When you first meet them, the infected seem like a far greater challenge than any human opponent. But all it means is that you have to abuse Joel's listen mode that makes all nearby enemies visible, even through walls, and make him move as slowly as possible. As long as you do that and toss a few bottles, getting past them usually isn't a big deal. For any infected that get too close, you can stab them with one of your limited use shit. It's hard to take the clicker's instant kill ability seriously. Your allies can shove them off without much effort. But for some reason, you have to invest in a costly upgrade that takes hours to unlock, and that's just to earn the ability to have a chance at countering these attacks. There's no reason that Joel, a man having survived 20 years in this world, wouldn't have learned to shiv enemies before they grab his neck. This is made worse when shivs can only be used on enemies during stealth when you don't have the upgrade, making it artificially more difficult than it needs to be. Thankfully, instead of letting the infected do the talking, the majority of your time is spent fighting humans. That's good because these battles are executed far better. They have variety, they change up their tactics, and are far more likely to present a fun, intense challenge rather than a tedious game of dying and restarting over and over. The AI is remarkable in most cases. They flank you, press you, and use a wide array of abilities comparable to your own. Your character is not a tank, and the game will make that clear anytime you try to charge bandits. With their vast numbers, your only hope is to be smarter than your opponents. I wish this AI was in more games, as it's the first time since Fear that opponents have felt this challenging from a mental standpoint. Fighting bandits is natural. Use bricks and bottles to distract enemies so you can take them out quietly one by one, or you can take the direct approach, at your own risk. It's nice to have multiple solutions for the same fight, something the game makes possible by hiding lots of varied loot for you to use. If you're on a higher difficulty, you're often pushed to the brink of your planning with whatever you have left. This does help make every bit of your arsenal useful and every choice impactful. That said, some late game sections force you into either combat or stealth against your will. Most of the time, these forced moments come about when you least expect it, and you have little chance of success if you don't come prepared. They try to compensate by leaving lots of lootable items around for action sequences, but that takes valuable seconds away from being behind cover and from shooting, putting your progress on the line because of a developer's decision. The stealth sections are usually not as intrusive. The stealth-focused combat, even in gunplay, is refreshing. With far too many third-person games following the same style of run-and-gun action, it's nice to see a studio stray from the norm. The Last of Us feels like Resident Evil in its survival gameplay, and like Dead Space in its looting, tactical shooting, and use of multiple weapons. No matter who you are fighting, you'll struggle to find crafting resources to make new items, and often are trying your best to outwit any opponents, be they infected or bandit. The upgrade system is limited, which is perhaps to be expected after an apocalypse. Weapon upgrades can be applied at workbenches, but they will require tools of a certain level for some upgrades to unlock. The system will be fine if it at least rewarded long-term upgrades, but most early gun upgrades aren't substantial besides minor reload speed increases and larger clip sizes. Later tools needed to give you better upgrades don't appear until just before the end of the game, and at least one of them can be missed entirely. Personal upgrades through pills, which are essentially lootable experience points, are just inconsistent. Upgrading healing speed sounds useful, but in reality is unnecessary on most difficulty levels, while listening range, health, and the aforementioned counter ability are so necessary you'll pass up trying any of the cheaper upgrades just to help ensure your odds of survival. When you aren't being chased by enemies, the game takes on a very atmospheric setting, but despite those issues, the open areas are where the game's tone is strongest. It feels abandoned. It feels like you're walking through the last remnants of a long-gone civilization. I just wish the game could do that more often. The tone carries over to the cutscenes, which are all incredibly well done. They show off impressive lighting and motion capture, and in-game animations do an admirable job of keeping the transition between gameplay and pre-rendered moments fluid. The gameplay is strong enough that complementing it with great atmosphere is a 1-2 punch. It's not something I anticipated coming from a studio whose strengths have been music and set pieces. The controlled and ominous soundtrack adds far more personality than a constantly booming orchestra. This is the first of what I hope will be many Naughty Dog games that understands show, don't tell when it comes to narratives. As a big fan of creative multiplayer options, I was excited to see how multiplayer would pan out for The Last of Us. Of the 3 game modes, 2 are variants of Team Deathmatch, one with only 1 life per player across a series of rounds, while the other just has limited reinforcements. 2 teams of 4 go head-to-head, using abilities and items from single player, but with some tweaks. Proximity mines detonate on a timer if thrown. Med kits have different crafting resource requirements, and more traditional guns are included. You carry over items from your last life into the next, but in regular Team Deathmatch there are only 20 respawns available, so every life still counts. Interrogation has you hunting down an opposing faction member to learn the location of an objective you must capture, adding a nice wrinkle to what would otherwise just be capture the flag. Naughty Dog seems to have fixed their unpredictable matchmaking from Uncharted 3. Instead of constantly stacking the odds in favor of one team before the match begins, matchmaking tries to balance out teams, although it still usually reassigns people to the same teams, even when it needs to swap them around. They do have options to select from a few matchmaking options, including DLC-specific matchmaking, so your hard-earned dollars won't be wasted on maps you've never played. Leveling has also been changed, as your progress is not indicative of some artificial progression level. Instead, it's represented by a population count for your band of survivors, and they grow in number based on your team's success. You earn supplies in-game, and have to keep earning them for your AI clan to stay intact. It's a decent attempt to add incentive to keep playing, but I couldn't help but feel disinterested in the little dots floating around that were supposed to be my survivors. Having the ability to actually visit the camp in a useful way a la Splinter Cell Blacklist could have made it feel more personal. If you get a used copy of the game, expect to see the dreaded online passcode that so many publishers have been trying to use. As if that weren't enough, there are aspects in multiplayer that are ripped from free-to-play games, like charging you money for character customization options. This could be excused if there was a free-to-play multiplayer version, like with Uncharted 3, but as it stands, this is a tactless decision to try and get more money from players. Despite being relatively active so far, I have doubts on the longevity of the multiplayer. The popularity of other multiplayer offerings may sway the Naughty Dog faithful, but it might come down to a bleak future for online play if it doesn't gain long-term support. The Last of Us is a game you'll either love or hate. There are design choices that hold it back from being an amazing experience, but there are just as many moments and aspects that keep it from being shelved on the discount. It's as imperfect as its protagonists, and maybe that's fitting. You get your money's worth in both single-player and multiplayer, but don't expect it to be the centerpiece of your game library. It's a good game. A damn good game. But far from the greatness promised. Here's hoping whatever Naughty Dog comes up with next truly hits it out of the park.
We don't have to do this. You know that, right?
What's the other option?
Be done with this whole damn thing.
After all we've been through. Everything that I've done. It can't be for nothing.